first guest, our only guest, is playwright Jordan E. Cooper. And last year, his groundbreaking satirical odyssey, Ain't No Mo, premiered at the Public. And most recently, he wrote a short film during quarantine, Mama Got a Cough, which he produced with Orange is the New Black's Danielle Brooks. And that film is nominated this weekend for Best Quarantine Content at the Antonio Awards, which honors the work of Black artists from the last year in both Broadway and off-Broadway, and can be streamed on Broadway Black's YouTube channel. I wanted to get you on because I didn't see Ain't No Mo, but what I did see was this speech you made about what the queer future means to you and how you see it. And that really spoke to me as just like a queer artist who is always seeking out new work and seeing institutions as they are.
That was a special moment. I think it was the first time I was ever asked to reflect on my queerness. It was the first time I was ever asked to reflect on my queerness, but also asked like what I want as a queer person in the future. And so that question just opened up a Pandora's box of all these things that I wish I could see.
What's so funny is that you can see them now. Like, you see them now very clearly.
Yeah.
And at that time, you were saying, and some people were saying it, but not everyone was saying it. You were like, Black Lives Matter, trans lives matter, Black trans lives matter. The first ad I saw for Black Lives Matter came on. And that was sort of a moment where it's like, okay, so we're finally accepting that this is not a terrorist organization. It deserves public advertising as much as like any New York City PSA. And I think that speaks a lot to the progress we've at least made in the past 2 weeks.
I think there's a shift happening. And I think coronavirus was just the cherry on top. People are really upset, and I think it's time that like we come together as a nation and flip the table over, you know.
There's this new concept called Share the Mic right now, and it's fascinating to me because I feel like that is one way to help, but it's also such like a temporary thing that like I also fear, because yes, one day of elevating a Black person's voice is like a good start, but I don't think it's like the finish in any capacity, you know?
Right, absolutely, not at all.
One of the things that you said in that speech was a queer future means our next breath, and now all we have to do is take it. And the examples I've seen of queerness have really just evolved ever since that. Like, that speech was in May, and then the timeline was like A Strange Loop premieres, and just changes the narrative of what a queer voice can look like. Obviously, it goes on to win the Pulitzer Prize. I've literally had like all of them on, because the moment I saw it, I was just like screaming. I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is groundbreaking. Ain't No Mo premiered, I believe, last year, right? That was right before you made that speech. And then Slave Play on Broadway, and then like Betty on HBO. And High Maintenance just had the first episode on television I've seen about like two transgender bodies in a relationship together. And I've just never seen that before.
So I have to take that out.
Oh yeah, this latest season is like incredible. It's like they have an episode about like an intimacy director having a.
Yeah, I saw that episode. Yep.
Oh.
Yeah, that was great. That was the writing was just.
Amazing. How much of it have you seen? What other High Maintenance episodes have you seen?
The last episode I saw, and then I saw the one about the woman who's a dentist assistant, and her husband was like handicapped.
I like the one about the public schools that the asexual guy was into. That's a great one from early on, where he just like is a magician. How has your vision of the queer future evolved since your speech?
I don't think it has. I think that we're making strides, but I feel like everything, and that's why I watched it again the other day, because it was like everything that I was saying was like, it felt like needed to happen in the moment, and needed to be shifted right now still. So it's still pretty much intact as far as like what I hope and what I want and how I would like to see us move forward. Um, yeah, it's really interesting. I actually didn't expect that when I watched it again earlier in the week. I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what I would say now.
Exactly, dude. There's like Nostradamus qualities laying there. Everything you said, I've seen in like 12 white people stories, honestly. Like, if I'm being very specific about it, like Pride being a sea of whiteness and people sort of remembering, you know, their specific history. Like you're talking about acknowledging Clara Barton next to like Crystal LaBeija, who founded house culture for drag queens as we know it, and talked about the fragility of like Black men when it comes to homophobia and transphobia. And it just really, it's, I've seen all of those in like either little memes or just, it's so weird.
It is weird. It is weird. But I'm glad that we're seeing it now. I'm glad that we're starting to see it as a people even beyond the queer community, that we're starting to listen and move and act. Yeah, now's the time.
It's funny you bring up listening because literally I did some research on you, and listening was a huge part of how you became a writer. You were a person that was always surrounded by conversations by adults or watching things that like you weren't supposed to watch, and because you felt like left out of the room, that gave you more of a voice. And I've definitely felt that in my own ways. But you have this amazing story about being cast as a shadow and how that sort of made you a playwright, and I need to hear it.
Yeah, that was crazy. That was crazy. Yeah, that was high school. That was. It literally feels like an episode of a television show when I say it now. Like, it's crazy. But yeah, so you know the story. But basically, it was like I had a drama teacher who 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 was racist, and she she had these auditions for her fall show. It's called Sparks in the Park, and basically, um, it was me and this other girl. We were the only two Black people in the theater department, and we auditioned for the show. And I remember she pulled us both aside after the auditions, and she told her first, she was like, you know, Serafina, you're so good, but we just can't give you this role because you would have to be romantic with a white boy on stage, and it would look like peanut butter and tuna on stage together. And she pulled me aside. She was like, Jordan, you're so good, but it's just not a part for you in this play. And so basically all the people of color who auditioned became shadows.
You can't make that shit up. You
Right?
cannot.
Because shadows moving things on and off, and it was very elegant. You know, we did it to the Edward Scissorhands theme. You know, we had rehearsal every Wednesday, and they would teach us our movements and how to elegantly, yeah.
They would teach you your movements. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
As shadows, you know.
Shadows,
Yeah. You can figure it out on your own. Anyway, you had written a sort of a play in response to that, right?
Yeah. I was really upset. So and this girl Serafino, she was such a great actress. I was like, you know what? I was like, fuck that. If we can be a her play, I'm gonna write my own. And so I wrote this play, and the leads were interracial couple, her and another boy, and it made her like $600 off of $2 tickets. I should have called it peanut butter and tuna. Is what I should have called it. But no, it went on to get picked up in a season by DDA Productions in Fort Worth. And I remember that play. It was the first play that I ever had professionally produced. And the reviews that I got, I thought I'd never write again. One of them was like, I think one of them was like, maybe Mr. Cooper should consider graduating high school before he writes again or something like that. It was like, it was something that was like shattering. I didn't
Wow.
think I was gonna write again, but my dad was like, "She ain't never wrote no play. She couldn't write a play. Like, you wrote a play." And so, like,
Exactly,
as time
man.
goes on, I just kept going and kept going and kept going.
What I'm starting to realize is in theater, there's so much in emphasis on training and being ready for the moment. And I feel like a lot of people are like, well, I don't know these things, so maybe I'm not ready. But it is really just about doing it. And you have to just dive in and you just have to keep going, whatever
You really
happens.
do. It's like I don't think there's ever going to be a when we sit around and we wait to figure out how to do something or the manual or the resources, it's never going to get done. You know,
Exactly.
and we're always going to be waiting on a capability of the education when really the education is just doing it. You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, what happened right after that between Ain't No Mo and you writing this play and making bank for the town?
Right. So I did that, and then sold concessions at Jubilee Theater in downtown Fort Worth, and I wrote this one-man show called Masked, which was about a blackface performer in the early 1900s, and his career being on the decline because of the Black Power movement. And the star of that show was Major Attaway, who's actually played the genie.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
and we used to rehearse in my living room when I was in high school, and I just directed. It was special. And then we did that show, and then that show did really well. And the artistic director of Jubilee Theater at the time came and saw it, and then he made me the artist in residence at Jubilee Theater. So then
How old were you?
I was 17.
Damn.
Yeah, I was 17. And so I started ADing their shows, and I started a couple of them. And I wrote a play for the end of their season called Black Boy Fly, which was based off of a Kendrick Lamar song. And we did that, and that went really well. And obviously it was cool to see like a lot of young people going to the theater. And they were like, where are all these young people coming from? I'm like, it's Kendrick Lamar, Black Boy
Yeah.
Fly. But it was so amazing because it was pay what you can, and the neighborhood and the community just like filled up that theater, and I was able to use some of the funds from that play to get me through my first year of school. And do it.
Damn. Where was school?
At the new school here in New York.
Right on. Oh, that's tight. Did you talk about going to the new school? What did they contribute to your voice that you didn't have already?
Uh,
Yeah.
I think they contributed community. You know, they contributed. There was something about, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to go to the new schools, because there was something about being surrounded by artists, right? Being surrounded by not just drama folks, but fashion designers, graphic designers, musicians, vocalists, like just this community of artists. And I think I made some lifelong connections at the new school, and those people and that school enhanced the way I think in a really liberating way. I feel like when I moved to New York, I discovered who I was, and I wasn't ashamed of who I was when I moved to New York.
Mm.
Before that, I felt like I was homophobic. I had a lot of internalized homophobia.
As was I. That's so crazy. Yeah.
You're raised, you know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
like when you can't when you can't be something, you learn to hate it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're not allowed to. It's like, oh, they say I'm supposed to hate this thing about myself. Okay, I'm gonna learn. I'm gonna teach myself how to hate this thing, right? And I was just talking about this recently, also with the way that I truly believe that most majority of us who are walking around, especially in this country or born in this country, are born white supremacists. Like we are taught to hate queerness. We're taught to hate blackness. We're taught these things not through the love of our parents, but through media, through the things that we see, through the things that we're taught in school. And we're right now, I feel like we're seeing a reckoning of breaking those chains and taking off those white hoods, because
Yes.
I always say, like, people during the riots, they see fires. I see robes laying on the ground. You know what I mean? I feel like people are just taking off this shit and just being like, fuck y'all. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do, man. White
Like,
supremacy is what runs this country.
Yeah.
I'm like 2 years late to the game, but I am one of those people. I picked up Layla Saad's Me and White Supremacy book, and what I'm learning about myself is that there's just involuntary actions I've taken to suppress other voices that I just have to accept. I
Yeah.
can't be like a bitch about it. I can't be like, oh, but I'm scared of what I'll find out about myself. It's like, just find it out so you could do the work now so you can just not deal with it. Because what I keep telling my friends who are having a hard time with it is that, like, you just do this now so when you're 50 you don't have to untether yourself from like the shitty person you've become.
Right, exactly. And then pass that on to others, right? And pass it on and teach it. And it's a deep thing, man, because it's so ingrained in the fabric of who we are as a nation. I truly believe that once white supremacy is completely eradicated, this country is going to go broke.
Oh my God, yeah.
Because it runs on oppression. And the minute that we rip that away, that we unplug that core, it's gonna have to shut down, and we're gonna have to rebuild. What you build is way more important than what you burn down. And I think that we're burning these things down, and we're burning down white supremacy. But the question is, what are we gonna build up? You know, what are we gonna build once it's all burned?
Do you think we have to take that risk? Because that is, I mean, it's a great transition to what I do want to talk about with you is institutional theater. Institutional theater is having a huge reckoning right now, and it's in my community too. Earlier today, I'm part of the Flea Theater, and I don't know if you've heard like what's been going on over there, but we're not paid, we're volunteers. We accepted that when we joined, and what it basically comes down to is that even though we were volunteers, they exploited a lot of Black trauma during a Color Brave season, and it just left a lot of wounds for a lot of the BIPOC artists in our community. And so when you say Black Lives Matter right now, you have to be able to accept what comes with it. And they had a hard time in their response to us and to Bryn Carter, who is the actress who sent this open letter to social media. And now the Bats are basically reinstitutionalizing how the theater runs. How have you seen institutions, positive and negative experiences have you had?
You know, I think that there's a shift happening. It takes things like those letters to wake people up. Now the question is whether or not they're going to do something, right? And also, it's like we have to remember to not waste our time begging for crumbs from the table of joy. I always talk about that Dick Gregory quote where he was like, you know, I waited at the corner of a white restaurant for 12 years, and when they finally integrated, they didn't have what I wanted. You know, so it's like, yes, and make sure that you're building. Like I said, it's like what you build is more important than what you burn down. It's like make sure that we're building something new, right? And we're not having to ask or beg people to shift the way that they do things. Rather, we can make the world shift the way that they do things based on what we do, right?
Yes.
Because I, for one, I get tired. I get tired of asking to be treated with respect, and to be thought about when things are said and when things are acted upon. The American theater is called the Great White Way for a reason, but the American theater, it really did hijack an African art form. Because the origins of theater, we talk about the Greeks, right? And we talk about Dionysus, and we talk about homeboy, who's the first actor. What was his name?
Fuck, my theater history teacher is gonna hate me for this.
Right, theater history quiz.
Oh man,
mine is too.
Thespis,
yeah.
Oh.
Before that, it was like in Africa there were these rituals, there were these gatherings, there were these things where we were performing a story, right? Out of a ritual, we were performing a story, and that part of theater history is not taught. That part of theater history is not in textbooks. It's not in acting books.
Like where the story comes from, you mean?
Like where performance comes from, where the idea of stepping out and performing and telling a story in front of an audience comes from is Africa, right? We've been trained to think really that this art form is not for us. And that's why with Ain't No Mo, it was so imperative to make it a welcoming space. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to see shows that are by Black writers that I walk into the space and I immediately feel unwelcome. Not only by the people at the box office, not only by the ushers, but by people who are audience members, who are subscribers, who like whenever you laugh, they turn around and they look at you like, why are you laughing so loud? Right? It's like those things. Or like I think you're in that seat over there actually. You need to you know what I mean? Like it's that energy of, oh, you're making this very clear that this is your space. From the beginning of Ain't No Mo, it's like from the moment people walked in, I want them to hear back that ass up. I want them to hear neck if you buck. I want them to hear, like, this is your space. That's why the opening scene is as polarizing as people say it is because it's like, oh, this is a setting of the space. This is sage.
Yes.
This is sage. You know, we've been tricked. We've been tricked into thinking that theater does not belong to us. When in reality, and even though we talk about the Chitlin circuit, right? There's beauty. There's so much beauty. I can't tell you the healing that I feel when I go see a Tyler Perry play, and it's filled with thousands and thousands and thousands of Black people watching a play, having a good time. You know what I mean? Like that's
yes, yeah.
Something that just does not exist in the American landscape of theater. And I've been talking a lot about education versus liberation. I heard that in a meeting recently, and it just made me it just opened up the world for me when it comes to talking about theater, especially Black theater, because there's an educational politic and a liberation politic, and most of the Black works that we see on stages at white institutions are educational, right?
Right.
They're meant to educate white people about something. They're meant to tell you about the pain that we feel, the Blackness, something that is built. And when I watch it, I know it's not for me, right?
Right, it's for the white people.
Right, exactly. Versus liberation, where it's like, we don't even have, like if it makes white people uncomfortable, it's because they don't feel included in the conversation. And that is liberation. That is something where it's like, hey, you white people, like I always say about my work, I always say, you know, you're not invited to the party, but if you knock on the door and the door's unlocked, I'm gonna let you in. You can get a plate, you can sit down and have a good conversation. We're gonna teach you the electric slide. Like, we're gonna have a good time, right? But at no point in time, from the moment that the lights bump up, are you invited? The door. Have to work with it. Because when we sit in these white spaces and we watch these white plays, we're not invited into the story, you know? Thousands of people automatically, they have an entryway, but we have to do work. We have to go across monkey bars and shit just to figure out, okay, why would that bitch do that? Oh, she's white. That's why. She has the ability and the privilege to do this. Okay, let me go into your world, right? But at no time, like it's the work that we have to do when we go to their works, they have to do when they come to our works.
There is a beauty to that interdependence as an audience, right? Like, we are all here for the same reason. And one of the things that you've said that you were sort of starting to get at was that when you see a lot of pain without medicine, it was most likely the white people that created that story. So there has been a lot of debate between like the value of exploiting Black trauma, whether those stories are told by Black playwrights or white playwrights. As much as you exploit that trauma, if you choose to do that, you have to share that joy at the same time, and it's finding that balance. And that's why I liked Slave Play, because like it or not, there was joy throughout that show. I mean, obviously in the last like 20 minutes, that was, You know, that was the message of it. But if they don't go hand in hand, if it's all heavy-handed, then I feel like everything you're trying to create just goes to shit, you know? Strange Loop, there was joy throughout.
Yeah.
It is so respected by people like Tyler Perry because, as people from that cast have said when they've come on, we're presenting truths. We're not trying to clap back.
Strange Loop for me was I saw that like 3 times, and I bought tickets for others. And I don't
Yeah.
I don't have money like that. So if I buy a ticket for somebody else, I mean,
Yeah, dude, I bought. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I took my friend to see it for her birthday, and she loves musicals. And um, I should just preface it by saying she's white, because I was being like, you don't understand. This is the most beautiful, heart-wrenching, hilarious thing I've ever seen. It tickles all my senses, and there's so many entryways. So I was like, there's got to be an entryway for her.
Yeah,
I sat next to her for 90 minutes, and she was just completely bold-faced.
yeah,
And I was just like, what is going on? Like, everybody around me is enjoying it except for her. And it occurred to me that a lot of musical theater is about escapism.
mhm,
And you know, there's the waitress sort of escapism, there's like the jukebox musical escapism, there's even the Bruce Springsteen escapism, if you want it.
yeah,
And I think it's surprising to me that that was a prime example of fragility. I just didn't know how to articulate it yet
yeah,
or understand it. But
yeah.
yeah, it was just surreal to see that on
Yeah.
that, something I respected so much.
I have brilliant contemporaries. Um,
Yeah, I,
they're from Erica to Keeley to Danye to Jeremy to Michael to Katori to Dominique.
even with Broadway Black, that is just a phenomenal organization that has existed for a while, by the way. They've had the podcast for a while.
Yeah,
Amber, Danye, and Drew.
yeah,
Phew.
they're great.
Um,
Woo.
no, they what they did was I only discovered it like 3 weeks ago doing research for Michael R. Jackson, because he's done like so many podcasts. It's like kind of crazy. It's
Yeah,
amazing. But they've created groundwork for so many Black voices to articulate their how they see theater, and the Antonio Awards is just a great extension of that in a moment like this. So I definitely want to hear how Mama Got a Cough got started for you.
yeah. So that was basically I was scrolling through Facebook, I think, and I saw an article um, about this family. Excuse me, and it was over like 40 of them, and their matriarch was dying of the virus, and none of them could be there. So they all 40 of them, cousins, aunts, uncles, kids, everybody got on like a Zoom call to say goodbye. And something about that, just having to not reach out, not like when something goes wrong and you not being able to be there as a family. Like, this is how we're able to show love, and this is how we're able to show support right now. There was something really interesting in that, and so I always like to find the joy and what's the funny thing about it. And I just started thinking about my own family, which is hilarious as well. And I just started thinking, what would happen if this Black family got on Zoom to check on their mother, who has the virus, and they're trying to convince her to go to the hospital, because especially that generation, it's hard for Black people to trust doctors and hospitals just because of our history with medicine in this country.
Yeah.
So there was something interesting about that, and I wanted to find a way to do that. And I just started hearing all these characters, and I just started writing them down, and they came out the way they did.
I did observe that distrust of, you know, healthcare professionals is real. I think Nicole Byer was doing an interview the other day where she talked about how she got like a knee injury or something like that, and they were like, oh, just ice it, you'll be fine. And there is a precedent that is set apparently by these white doctors that black people are just stronger and they'll recover because they're just stronger. And I have no idea where the fuck that comes from. If you take that vow, you have to follow through with it. I just don't understand that.
I mean, and it comes from slavery, right? It came from, I feel like in order for them to have some sort of peace or sanity with owning another human being and working another human being to death, you have to mentally shift something in your brain that says, oh, but they're not human.
Mhm.
They don't feel pain. They don't get sad. They don't cry. So, give it to them. You know what I mean? And so it's like that mentality comes from like slaves being used as experiments, especially for the birth of gynecology. Performing these experiments on black women and not giving any anesthesia. Just basically brutalizing them.
Right. Did you see Behind the Sheet, by the way?
I didn't get to see Behind the Sheet.
Yeah, we just had my friend Christina Pitter come on. The guy who like founded gynecology had basically spent years experimenting on his slave women specifically, and it's just it absolutely starts with slavery, and that's why Juneteenth is such a beautiful day for Broadway Black to just sort of set this for
I
you.
always wanted Juneteenth to get more attention. I feel like it's going to, because I'm from Texas, so it's like Juneteenth is a holiday in Texas, but it usually doesn't get observed anywhere else in the country. So
How is it celebrated? Like, how big is it?
It's not super big. It's very within the community. Like it's like you'll have barbecues, or like there'll be like a festival, or there'll be like concerts, or you know what I mean, like small parades, things like that.
Yeah, that's never happened anywhere else. That's crazy.
No, because it's always just been a Texas thing because of the history of it. One of my friends who's from Louisiana and moved to Texas, she said when she first moved there, she didn't know what Juneteenth was, about like how like it was when the Texas slaves found out that they were free, and they were the last to know, and she was like, so y'all celebrating being the last to know?
Oh my God.
What kind of Texas shit is that? How you celebrate being
That's some bullshit. Oh my God.
Celebrate being the first? Goddamn. So yeah, and it's so special. It's so special because it's like I can only imagine what that feeling was like. Like, so we've been free for how long? Yeah. Like what? You come again? Come again? Yeah. So it's a special holiday. I think that's the real Independence Day.
The independence that we know was just written by like these four rich dudes in a room, and is actually just doesn't age well when you look at everything they were probably excited about.
That's why I love Hamilton, but Hamilton was also hard for me. I love Hamilton.
Let's talk about Hamilton. I haven't talked about Hamilton once on this podcast, actually. 17 episodes.
And I love Lin-Manuel.
Yeah.
I love, especially In the Heights. That whole soundtrack is just,
It's cool.
But my thing with Hamilton that always felt icky, and I still haven't seen it. That's why I'm looking forward to it being on Disney Plus, so I can finally afford to watch it.
Yeah.
But the thing that always like made me feel icky about Hamilton was this idea of these people of color preserving these stories of these slave owners, of these white men who did not consider the people portraying their stories as human, right? And I think there's a side of it where on face value, it seems very radical, right? It seems very like, oh, that's so cool that we have these. But really, in actuality, it's like, I would much rather see those bodies be portraying the people who were not considered people at the time, or heroes and activists and geniuses after that time. There's just something about like it feels like slaves performing Mass Hysteria on the porch. That's the icky part about it for me. I was just like, like, do I really want to see that? But you know what? I think there is a radical thing, but it's also like the thing that I'm like, ugh. No, I love
Yeah,
Hamilton.
it's not really burning down anything as much as it is like recalibrating it.
Yeah, yeah. It's almost like if they were to do a musical about Robert E. Lee and the Confederate, and everybody's just like, "Oh, it's so amazing!" And they have black people playing Robert E. Lee in the Confederate. Oh my gosh! It's like,
You ever hear about that photo negative production of Othello?
no.
Patrick Stewart played Othello at the Shakespeare Theater Company. I swear to God, and everybody else was black.
Is this?
Like the
Are you
80s.
serious?
Yeah, man.
Wow, that's interesting. That's
Fascinating.
interesting. No, I love shifting things up like that. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not against that. I just think I think it should be a part of the conversation.
As much as, the Rockefeller organization is part of using Hamilton to
Right.
teach the, like, most also pretty much inner city youth who come to these, Wednesday matinees, and they make their own art, and that's a beautiful thing. Like that transaction of like letting the audience be on that stage on some level and giving kids that elevation. But at the same time, they also there needs to be the whole transparency, and I think that's what people are longing for right now. It's like we can't, the sheet is just a veil.
That's
You
the
know what I
thing,
mean?
and I think that's the thing. But I'm proud of the work that was done on it. But that's my icky thorn of it. It's an
No,
icky thorn to everything.
exactly. Yeah, I think we could all find icky things, like in college, we were all sort of just trained to be like, ooh, but what can they do better? You know
Right.
what I mean? It's so much easier to tear shit down than it is to build it back up. That is what's going to be the challenge with all of this, you
Absolutely.
know?
But we gotta keep shaking the table, keep shaking the
Yeah.
table, keep asking hard questions, keep demanding the hard asks, because I feel like that's when change really happens.
What's the hardest ask you can think of right now that seems like as distant as the queer future, as the vision for the queer future that you had sort of is coming true? So let's
I
hear it.
When it comes to theater, I would like at least 20% of the off-Broadway theaters in New York City to have Black artistic directors, to have a Black Broadway theater, or not. It doesn't even have to be a Black Broadway theater, but owned by a Black person or a collective.
Right. That's why everybody's so surprised about the Nederlanders, right? Everybody's like, I can't believe they voted for Donald Trump. I'm like, why can't you believe that, man? They're millionaires. They're like less than 1%. They're 0.01.
Right, they're not.
Obviously.
Also, it's like they're the gatekeepers. I think there needs to be a changing of the guard in a lot of ways, especially when it comes to Broadway. Because I've seen so many shows that deserve to be there that haven't been there. I've seen so many shows there. Like to be honest with you, when I have a hard time with writer's block or anything like that, I would go see a horrible show on Broadway, and I would come home and be like, if they can get that produced,
There you go.
this, And I bet that's the thing, because we think we're so far away from it. Creatives of any kind who are watching this, I feel like we think that we're so far away from the thing. It's like, oh, we look up and we see these people on stage, or oh, I look up and I see that writer getting a Pulitzer, or I look up and I see this director getting a Tony, and it's like, actually, it's not that far away.
No.
It's not Wakanda. Like
It's not, man.
it's possible. It's absolutely possible if you keep working. It's absolutely possible.
Yo, look at Parasite, right?
Yeah.
That's a prime example. Everybody was certain, well, this World War I movie really has it. I really feel like it's the story that needed to be told. And then you have a massive sweep. And I'm ashamed to say, I was part of a Oscar party thing, and I put Parasite for everything except Best Picture.
Wow.
right?
No, but the thing is, that's not surprising either because I wouldn't have expected like when La La Land was announced over Moonlight before we actually found out it was Moonlight. It was like that wasn't a surprise. I didn't even see that it was a mistake because I turned my TV off once they said La La Land. They were like La La Land. I was like, these motherfuckers. I turned my TV off and I go on Twitter and I'm like, ugh, I'm so upset. What? What was the moment? Toni Morrison was saying in that video, she was like, when it comes to racism, I think white people have a very, very serious problem, and I think they should get together and think about what they can do about it. And that goes back to the fatigue, the social justice fatigue of always fighting to change because it's like, actually, I didn't build this thing. Why do I have to tear it down? I shouldn't even have to be doing this. I should be laying in the back sun rooftop, sitting in the sun with a gangster lean. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like I should be on vacation right now. Black people should be on vacation. White people should be in the streets fighting and riot. Well, no, don't riot because the amount of white people who've been burning shit down and then it gets blamed on black people.
It's so sad too because
It's a mess. And then there was given. I saw one video where they were just these white men were riding around in the car giving black people bricks to throw. And I saw this black woman. She went up to that car. She was like, "How dare you?" She was like, "Do you know what the fuck you're doing? Do you know that you could get them killed by doing that?" And she went off. She went off. But it was like I don't know what that mentality is. I really don't. But it's a beautiful thing to be out and protest and to see so many non-black people out there. It's actually very beautiful because it means that there's something going on. I just hope that it doesn't become the new card to pull. I just hope the new card doesn't become, I'm not racist. I march for George Floyd.
last thing I'm going to ask you is, where do you see theater when we come back?
Where do I see theater when we come back? Socially distant.
You really think so?
I do. I think that we're gonna be socially distancing for a while. I think it's gonna be a while before you can sell out a house with every seat in the. You know what I mean? I just don't see people being comfortable enough to do that for a while. I definitely see young people doing it way before the subscriber age does it.
Yeah, that's what's exciting, right? Because
it's exciting, but it's also what people need to think about in their programming. So don't be doing Oklahoma. Don't be doing a Raisin in the Sun. Don't be doing a Streetcar Named Desire. I need you to be in the now.
But then there's the other side of that, right? There's the 1776 coming, and they have a whole plan to upturn that. Basically, like taking the step that sort of the sidestep that Hamilton sort of made for retelling these stories and resharing them. But honestly, people could have been doing that for so long, so much longer ago. Like I think they did that with Guys and Dolls, kind of, right? Like there was a Black Guys and Dolls in the early 90s.
Yeah, I love those things, man. I think those things are really beautiful, but it goes back to what's taking up space. There are so many plays and so many beautiful musicals like A Strange Loop being written right now that are not being produced because we want to see the same stories over and over again. And I think that can be a good thing. I love a good revival, but I just don't think there should be more revivals of the thing than there are original works and new works. Because it's like we might get something different out of seeing women of color and non-binary people and transgender people playing those roles, or we just might leave with the same story that was written by the white man.
True.
Getting the royalties every time you buy a ticket.
Yeah.
So it's like I think there's a it goes back to the icky thorn of the thing because I think that's a beautiful thing to revive works and to switch up the casting, do something new and say something new. But I just also want to make sure that we're holding space for the new show that's being written by whoever.
Absolutely, man. I completely agree that it's totally about spinning the wheel and making sure the engine isn't just a white engine.
Yeah.
if a white voice has to be included. You know what I mean? I think it's more fascinating to consider, do we need to include white voices? And that brings a greater conversation to like what people like me, what is my role in this? And that's really just for me to fucking figure out on my own. But
Absolutely. Everybody has to figure it out, you know. Everybody has to figure it out, especially when it comes to storytelling. What are we saying? What are we saying? What are we putting out? Because it's like you could always you could do D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation with an all black cast, and that's gonna be cool. But it's like it's still D.W. Griffith's The Birth of a Nation. Like,
exactly.
it's still nothing's changing in material. They're just changing the face, and I feel like that's the problem that we're gonna run into. We're gonna run into, instead of being specific about the stories that we're telling, we're just gonna cast people of color and go on about our day. And I think that, yes, cast people of color, cast black people, cast Latinx people, cast Asian people, cast Pacific Islander people. Like, it's like cast all, yes, give the jobs. But there's more than that. There's so much more work to do than that. And I feel like that's where we stop short, because like Hamilton, it's like you do these stories with cast members of color, but you still have people in the audience who don't leave getting it.
Exactly.
Leave anything different. They just got the story of Alexander Hamilton. They're not thinking about Rashard being shot in the back. They're not thinking about George Floyd with a knee on his neck. They're not thinking about that. They're not thinking about the women who were brutalized for gynecology. They're not thinking about that, you know. They're thinking about Alexander Hamilton. What a great guy he was, you know. Or
exactly.
He was, rather.
Or what? Sorry.
I said, or a complicated guy he was, rather. Yeah. But yeah, so it's like, and that's the thing that shifted Harriet Tubman from being off the $20 bill too. So it's like we have to think about what we're doing whenever we write. And I wish we didn't have to. I wish you could write whatever you wanted to write, however you wanted to write it, which you can. But there's also responsibility in what you're saying, because if you're gonna have to know what you're saying, you know.
Compare it to coronavirus, right? I wish I didn't have to socially distance, but yeah, we have to. We're in this situation. We can't blame others. Anyway, you have been an amazing guest to have on. This was such a productive conversation for me. And if you guys want to check out Jordan E. Cooper's Mama Got a Cough, it's on YouTube. You guys should check out the Antonio Awards on Friday at 7 o'clock on Juneteenth. And you can also check out his monologue that was called Freedom for the 24-hour plays, which you can find on their Instagram. Thank you so much for coming on, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.